Looking after a severely disabled person at home is a full-time job. There are no days off. Sometimes families break down under the strain of trying to cope, and the disabled person has to go to a residential institution. In these 5 programs, we'll try to show you how some of these stresses and strains can be alleviated. And I hope you'll find something helpful, whatever type of handicap you're faced with, physical or mental. Today, we're going to see how one family has managed to cope.
2.
Wynne Howarth lives in Bradford with her husband Alan and daughter Anne. The family lives as normal a life as possible, bearing in mind Wynne's severe physical handicap.
Oh, that wasn't meant to be. Can you put that one on, Alan? I'm just wondering what to have next.
By all accounts, there's no shortage of cars.
But life used to be very much easier. Wynne Howarth.
17 years ago, I was counting my blessings because I was happily married. We had a baby daughter, Anne, who was 12 months old, and I had been in the nursing profession for 22 years. And I was then working as a nursing officer to the Yorkshire Regional Health Authority. And I was very fit and very able-bodied. And I left for work as usual, said goodbye to my husband and Anne. And it was a lovely fine June morning. And I was driving to work in Harrogate. And that's the last thing that I remember before my accident. As a result of my accident, I had multiple injuries. This included a broken nose, a fractured jaw, several teeth knocked out, a large hole through my lower lip, a few broken ribs, and my right elbow joint was completely disintegrated. And it took quite a while to get me out of the car, so the petrol leaked from the tank, and as a result I had petrol burns down my back. But these really are of minor consequence today. The most serious aspect really of my accident was that my neck was broken and damaged my spinal cord, and as a result of that I became almost completely disabled. That is, my chest muscles are paralysed, apart from my diaphragm. I've got paralysis of my bladder and my bowels. My legs are paralysed, apart from the fact I've got very strong involuntary muscular spasms.
At a very early stage, Wynne and Alan decided that, come what may, the family would stay together. From the start, this placed a heavy burden on Alan.
Of course, immediately a disablement of this kind happens, there's a total change in family life. The whole situation is altered and nothing goes on as it did before. My wife was in hospital for approximately 3 years when we had to get someone to look after Anne whilst I was at work. Every evening I had to take over. Frequently this meant putting her to bed. Always it meant getting her up at 10 o'clock and seeing that she was clean and dry, and then settling her again for the evening.
Over the past 17 years, the family has learned to cope with the problems posed by Wynne's disability, and a complex daily routine has evolved.
The day begins about 7 o'clock when my husband comes into my bed-sitting room, opens the curtains, empties my drainage bag, because not having any control over my bladder, I've got to have a catheter permanently there, draining into a disposable bag.
Things down there, all in order.
All in order, as usual.
Good.
He then prepares the breakfast, prepares me a large quantity of very weak tea, again because of having a paralysed bladder and a catheter situated there. I've got to have a large fluid intake, so I consume about 2 pints of tea first thing in the morning.
Electronic equipment enables Wynne to communicate with the outside world and to have a fair degree of independence at home.
Morning, Mrs. Hardy.
It's the nurses.
Morning, Sister Bev. Just a second and I'll release the door latch. Each morning, 2 nurses come in from the community nursing service, and the basic routine is that they wash me, dress me, lift me into my wheelchair, see that I'm comfortable. On 2 days of the week, my husband wraps me in disposable pads, gives me a suppository into my rectum, and it's hoped that by the time the district nurses arrive, my bowels have started to evacuate. But they must see that they're completely emptied, because otherwise I would have accidents in between those 2 days of the week.
No, not today. No. You've had it. Some of your bits.
I have a home help 2 afternoons a week, 4 hours each afternoon. When she comes, she gives me my lunch. And I try and make that a very simple meal because I like her to do as much as possible in the way of keeping the house in order. The housework which she doesn't do is obviously filled in by my husband. Then I have Meals on Wheels once a week, which again I feel, if the volunteers could be found, would be a great help if one could have it more often. Because obviously if people are needing Meals on Wheels, they're needing it every day as opposed to once a week. I think that once you have one member of the household who becomes handicapped, then really the whole family becomes handicapped. And we have found really that it's affected us from the moment that I had my accident in 3 main ways: financially, physically, and psychologically. Financially, because obviously once I became disabled and couldn't go back to work, I was no longer able to contribute to the household. And once you become disabled, your cost of living automatically goes up, because things like, heating, because I can't move around, we try and keep the house at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So, heating is expensive for any family. But this obviously is a major thing. Wear and tear on the house. Because of my heavy motorised wheelchair, we get more wear and tear on the carpet. From a physical point of view, I think it's the fact that because I'm permanently disabled, this means that everything has to be done for me, and that every book that I need has to be given to me. I can't change my position in bed. Someone has to do it for me. Since I can't travel by train or bus, then it's essential, if I'm going to try and live as normal a life as possible, that we must have a car. And although we've tried all sorts of hoists and aids to get me into the passenger seat, the only satisfactory way, because of my involuntary spasms and various other reasons, is for 2 people to lift me into the passenger seat. So, from the family's point of view, it is hard work for them physically, looking after someone severely handicapped.
Also, it's a fact that as I become older, I find it increasingly difficult to lift my wife, even with some assistance, and it's very easy to hurt one's back.
From a psychological angle, I think probably my biggest problem is that I've lost my independence. That you know that you'll never have it back again. It comes back to the fact that I get tired of always having to ask for everything that I need. Anne started to help me really from the time that she used to come for visits at the hospital. She used to run along to one of the nurses and say, "Mummy needs a new wee-wee bag." And when I came home from the age of being about 2.5, she used to wheel me around in my wheelchair. Now, to Anne, that was quite normal. She has never known me any differently.
I think one of my first memories is perhaps cooking, because I've always enjoyed it, and as a small child I remember grilling things so that it was nice and safe and you didn't have hot fat splashing around, and boiling the kettle for the first time one Friday and being really careful not to spill it all over myself and the furniture and what have you. As a very small child, I used to stand on the footplate so that I was a bit taller and try and, you know, put on makeup and things, but actually that's so long ago that I can really barely remember it.
From my angle, just being purely selfish, well, yes, I wish that she could remember that first year, you know, when I did look after her. It was difficult to accept that she was wheeling me, whereas I felt, well, I ought to be pushing her in her pram. And the world then seemed very topsy-turvy to me. And to have your daughter at the age of about 2 trying to put some makeup on for you, when she was about 2.5 or 3, she would help to wash my hands and face, cut my food up for me. And then gradually her responsibilities increased with her age until the point came when our help suddenly had to leave us when she was 7. At the age of 7, Anne was then helping to prepare meals. And when I used to say to her she ought to be outside playing when she came home from school, she would say, well, if I don't help to get the meal ready, then Daddy's got to do it when he comes in. And she would see jobs that needed doing, and she would accept the fact there was nobody else there to do it. And so she would do it. And she used to help to lift me in the car. And whilst I think that it's good for children to have responsibility, I feel that she had it at a much too early age, and she had too much of it, because she missed all that little bit of playtime. And I'm sad about that.
As far as possible, Wynne and Alan have worked to minimise the strain on their daughter.
I think the thing goes so much in my parents' favour is that I've had a very normal life and not been put upon to kind of be at home every night acting as a second backup nurse, which has really fallen on my father to do what I should be sharing, you know, with him. And it's due to him that I'm really allowed, you know, going out at night. It means that I won't be there to make the tea or settle mummy or do something like that. And so he has to do it for me. So really, I have him to thank that I've had such a normal life, really.
You realise that the family are having to do so much for you that sometimes, even if you're wanting something desperately badly, you feel you've just got to wait, because you know that they are not in the situation whereby they can do it for you immediately. So you've just got to learn to try and be patient. And then, if I get angry, it's the nearest and dearest who gets it. And I'm afraid that's taken out on my husband. The only movement that I've got is that I can bend my left arm upwards. By gravity, it drops down. I can put my wrist back. By gravity, it drops down. And I can turn it outwardly, and by gravity, it again drops down. But this is a marvellous trick movement, because you see, as I put my wrist up, it puts my thumb next to my finger. And as it drops down, I give it a little shake, my thumb separates from my finger. And by doing that and being able to turn it outwardly, and gravity bringing it back, I've been able to learn to turn over pages like that. So although it looks as if I've got finger movement, I haven't really. It's purely on that little bit of wrist movement. And it means if my food's cut up, I can manage to scoop up and feed myself. In order to get my midday meal, I parallel my wheelchair up to the kitchen table. And my husband's left my meal covered with a serviette, which I can manage to hook off with a trick movement of my wrist and get it tucked into my neckline. And he's got to leave my spoon and my plates in a certain position, because if they're about 2 inches away from me, they might as well be on Mount Everest, because I just cannot reach them. And then I managed to hook up a spoon and feed myself. At lunchtime, I usually have some cold salad or cottage cheese and some fruit. I think food costs more because, not being mobile, I can put on weight very quickly. So I try and keep on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet. It's a very good thing for your diet, because no matter how hungry I am, I could not get into the pantry or the fridge to get anything out. I go several times during the day to have a drink from a large flask, which is covered with some polystyrene and a piece of plastic tubing coming out of it, so that I can get a drink throughout the day. I like to have as few aids as possible, because the more you have, then the more you've got to go wrong. And it's the able-bodied people in the family who've got to look after them. But there are 2 essentials which I've got, and that is the fact I've got a motorised wheelchair, which enables me to have independence, and also saves the family that little bit of extra of wheeling me around the house. And no one can position you in a wheelchair exactly where you want to be, except yourself. The other thing is my electronics equipment, by which I can make a phone call independently. And that to me is the most important part of it, because then that means I've got contact with the outside world, whether I want it from an emergency point of view, or social, or for some of my voluntary work which I'm doing.
Social services.
Mr. Lavery, please.
Yes, what name is it, please?
Mrs. Howarth.
Just a moment. Oh, no. Hello, Mrs. Howarth.
Hello, Mr. Lavery. Thank you very much for your letter.
That's okay.
I'm very sorry to hear about this boy, you know, having a paralysis after his accident.
Yes.
And I'll be very pleased to see his mother. And what I wondered about was, would you like to give her my phone number? I suppose really for the last 17 years, I've been giving talks to various organisations on the problems of disablement. Then I'm a member of the local Community Health Council and Vice Chairman of the Spinal Injuries Association. So my day is really kept fully occupied with this sort of work. But I'm very glad to have it, because it means that I don't have time to reflect and think what I might have been doing if I hadn't become disabled. I feel that most people who are disabled like myself, they want to be at home. And also this is less expensive to the state if they're at home, as in comparison to be in some type of hospital or institution. And since we are having cuts in our expenditure, I think it's more important than ever that money is directed into the community so that we can keep people at home. And we should introduce schemes like the Crossroads Care Attendance Scheme, increase the amount of hours of home help people can have, increase, if we could, Meals on Wheels, and everything that gives the backup service in the community.
And the Crossroads scheme, which Wynne mentioned, is something we'll be looking at in another programme. Our guest today is Joe Kempling, lecturer in social policy at Hillcroft College in London. Joe, we've seen how the Haworth family are coping with severe disablement, and Wynne has raised the point that it's less expensive for a person to live at home. What supportive care is available to families and individuals?
Well, quite simply, there are 3 sources of help: financial, medical, and the support services offered to disabled people in their own homes. Firstly, the financial. Well, there are numerous benefits. They're often very confusing, and it's difficult to know which you're entitled to. So I would advise people to go to their local social security office for advice. If they're unsure where this office is, they should look in their telephone directory under Department of Health and Social Security. Health and Social Security Department of. If they're not satisfied with the advice that they get, they should perhaps then go to their Citizens Advice Bureau, or perhaps to their local voluntary organisation, or to their social worker.
Wynne is getting the supportive help that she needs, but surely there are gaps in this assistance throughout the country.
Yes, there certainly are gaps. Wynne talked in the film about the various services she received. For example, home help, Meals on Wheels. Some people receive help with telephone installations, aids and adaptations, this kind of thing.
What are the likely effects of cutbacks on expenditure in this area?
Well, these kind of services are very vulnerable to cuts. It's very easy to cut the number of home helps or to cut the number of hours. We've seen, for instance, that Wynne only receives 1 meal per week. Already there's a lot of information coming in about these sort of cuts. 2 Meals on Wheels, some local authorities are no longer installing telephones, aids and adaptations are being cut.
What can you do if you live in a very poorly served area?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure that you are getting the services that you're entitled to, and perhaps your first port of call should be your local authority social service department. Now, if you're unsure and you have no contact with your social worker, again, look up the address in the telephone directory under the name of your local authority and you'll see Social Service Department listed. Your social worker will be able to tell you the services that you're entitled to. If, for some reason, your local authority is cutting these services and they're no longer available, then perhaps you should join one of the local branches of the various voluntary organisations, like the Spinal Injuries Association, the Spastic Society, the British Polio Fellowship. You could also make representations to your local councillors who may be on the Social Service Committee, or at least have contact with the Social Service Committee, and also lobby your local MP.
After all, Wynne did make the point that she's saving the country a great deal of money, perhaps £5,000 a year or more, by living in her own home. And surely more money should be provided to provide these services.
Oh yes, indeed. I mean, we could make a case rather than decreasing community support services at this particular stage. We should be increasing them, a point which Wynne makes in the film.
Jo Kempling, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the other 4 programmes of the series, we'll be looking at how voluntary organisations can help. And next week, we'll be concerned mainly with the problems faced by the parents of young handicapped children. We've prepared a leaflet which gives more details about the things we've discussed today. If you'd like a copy, please send a large stamped addressed envelope to this address: The Handicapped Family, BBC Television, London, W12 8QT. The Handicapped Family, BBC Television, London, W12 8QT. And please don't forget to send a large stamped addressed envelope. Goodbye for now.